That's our music, and that means we're back with former Cubs scouting director, the great Tim Wilkin. I'm Mick Gillispie. Welcome to the Cubs baseball channel. Welcome to the MLB Scout podcast. And if you're going to hang out with us today, man, we're going to talk about so much going on scouting-wise, the trade deadline, and all that stuff. So like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. When we hit 1,000 subscribers, we're giving away a Ryne Sandberg autographed baseball. Even Tim would want one of those. You can't go wrong with a Rhino ball.
No, you can't at all. Jeez, Hall of Famer.
Well, let's get into it.
Guy.
Great guy, right? One of the all-time Cubs great. Episode 9 of the show. Let's get right into this. Jeimer Candelario back and better than ever. You were with the Cubs when Jeimer was coming up. And here he is. He's got, when we're talking right now, he's got 8 hits in 2 games, and the Cubs have just absolutely thrashed the Reds. And so, things are going pretty good at the friendly confines right now, and this guy's a big part of it.
Oh, big time. And Jeimer came to the Cubs, I believe it was in 2011 when he signed. He's always been able to swing the bat, and darn good pickup. And now he's in a lineup where probably he can see some more pitches as opposed to where he was in Washington. So this might have some pretty good play here for the next month and 3 quarters. So
when he was with the Smokies, a really good defender, smooth, great arm, looked the part, right? Good body, switch hitter. But the changeup was kryptonite, and then they traded him to the Tigers. And I always wondered, was he going to be able to eventually figure this out, or was his career going to, kind of fall down? And being there with Miguel Cabrera, who to me was one of the all-time great hitters of off-speed pitches, didn't hurt at all, right? I mean, to have the numbers and the career that Jeimer's had means that he figured it out.
Undoubtedly, and one of the things that comes into play here, I want to say when I first saw him, he was in the Dominican Summer League in 2011, and then I saw him there a little bit, and then I saw him in Boise the following year in 2012, and I want to say he was in the neighborhood of 180 to 190 pounds tops. Mm-hmm. And he kind of became a different player, and now he weighs 222 pounds.
Man strength. You're saying man strength, Tim.
Yeah, and you can see it in the numbers. And, he's been double figures with his home runs at a few places. I mean, Detroit, he hit 19 in 2018, 16 again in 2021, and then he had 16 with Washington prior to coming to the Cubs. And I think he's become a different player than maybe what you thought the projections were when he was a younger player.
What do you mean by that? Because he's got more power and maybe the batting averages?
Like I said, he was pretty good on his feet as a younger player. And I think with that, I think you were expecting a pretty decent bat, but now the power numbers are starting to come into play. He's got well over 50 extra base hits this year, and he's become basically a different style player than when he first signed. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say Cubs traded DJ Hers, one of their top picks, and a left-handed pitcher with an excellent changeup, and infielder, and I think it's Kevin Made. It's spelled M-A-D-E, but I haven't seen this guy. He's a lower-level shortstop. I felt like the shortstop was a lot more expendable just because they just drafted 2 guys out of college that are shortstops, right, including their first-round pick. And, those guys are going to be pretty much at the same level as Made, but But DJ Hurst, I mean, you're giving up a guy, look, who hasn't put it together yet, but left-handed, hides the ball well. I love a pitcher, Tim, that works off a changeup. I love it when your best pitch is your changeup, but you have a lot of velocity on your fastball because to me, that's a tough combo. He's got to throw more strikes, but he's only 22.
Yeah, he's still, lots of time, and the command and control is going to be the big key. And if he can get more consistent with his delivery, then I think you're going to see some pretty good results.
How do you do that? Look, I mean, and I know you weren't in development, but you were around it forever, because that's always a big question with certain guys. Ryan Jensen, who is one of the Cubs' top pitching prospects, a former first-round pick. Guys, I love the guy. I mean, built, nothing moves straight. He just can't get the consistency, right? And I mean, he's in AAA in the bullpen. But, he's not a starter because he wasn't able to do that on a consistent basis. Did you ever see it where they were able to work through something like that? How do they do that?
Well, sometimes it's in developing consistency of your delivery, and it only takes one pitching coach to suggest this or that, do a little tinkering, and if that player has the aptitude and body control to pick it up, then I think that has a chance to bode pretty well. But at the same time, you've got to be realistic, and if the body control is not there, I think you're going to get those inconsistencies of control and command, and it's a big key and a big if. But at the same time, there's been plenty of situations where pitchers have made just a slight tinkering to their delivery and they took off, and then others just can't seem to pick it up. So,
and I remember something you told me. Yeah, so, Tim, I remember something you told me, and I think it kind of applies to this. You said that when you would scout, you would watch a guy after he pitched just to see what his balance looked like and how he was able to kind of just handle his body. And I mean, I almost feel like this relates.
Well, I've always, not always, but had developed that mindset in evaluating a pitcher, and I just started looking at it a lot more closer than I did in my early years in scouting. But it's huge. I mean, you can take from my early years, and you'd see a guy like David Wells, and you'd say, I don't know. But then you'd watch him, and his body control was his biggest key, I think. And, he had the control and command. He won, 240 major league games. And I think if you were looking at him when he first got in, you'd say, no way. But this can happen to a lot of pitchers. It's you're just looking for that combo of pitching coach and pitcher that's still trying to put together something. And if they can suggest something to that pitcher, then I think if he's got the body control to implement it, then that might spell for a pretty good recipe for command and control.
Right. And I'd say over my 20 years in the game, the most frustrating thing is when you're scouting and drafting certain players, and then the development is not developing those players for whatever reason. Maybe it's philosophy, maybe it's chemistry, like you're saying. I mean, to have an organization that is spitting out guys to the big leagues, I think you really have to have those two things in tune.
Without a doubt. And you see a lot of organizations, Tampa Bay, I know I keep coming back to them, but they've probably developed quite a few more pitchers than most in the major leagues, and I think there's a consistency of philosophy there with the scouting department and player development.
Right.
And they work together pretty good as an organization, and quite a few strike throwers. When you get a guy from that comes up through the Tampa system, you see that consistency, and I don't think they tinker with it a lot, seemingly, but it's awful. I mean, you can see it through the numbers and the pitchers that they've developed through the last 20, 25 years, and they haven't changed that roster of player development a lot over at Tampa. So I think that's what you're striving for as an organization to get that kind of consistency and stay with it for a few years, especially if you've kind of went dry and there's been some suspect on some of the player development systems. If you can start bringing those guys in, I think that bodes well.
One of my biggest complaints about the Cubs is the way that they develop starting pitching, or they don't. Now, I mean, look, they got to give them credit. Justin Steele's in the big leagues. I don't know why Javier Asad's in the bullpen, because I think he's a starter, maybe just to kind of get his feet wet. But I think eventually he's got a chance to be in the starting rotation, and I give them a thumbs up on that. I saw Cade Horton last night, a first-round pick. Great stuff, really electric. And then the guy pitches 4 innings and throws like 60 pitches in a start. It's July. No, I'm sorry. It's August already. And to me, it's like there's got to be a balance between analytics, being afraid to get someone hurt, and going out there and pitching. And I feel like that we're so stuck on the analytics that we forgot that people are all different. And going through the lineup a third time, even if you lose the game, the Smokies, the Cubs AA team, was playing the Reds. Their pitcher was fantastic and then went through the lineup the third time and got hit around, and they lost the game. But it doesn't matter that they lost the game. That guy now has the experience of going through the lineup for the third time, and that's something that he may have to do in the major leagues. I'm just so baffled by how we're so analytical that we can't really get out of the way of thinking that, okay, yeah, that stuff's important, but guess what's also important? That everybody's different. And to develop someone, the analytics might not work for that person.
Exactly, and I think that was well spoken. One of the other things I think comes into play here is, how, and you can see it with the major league staffs, how much they use the bullpen. And sometimes you need that third time through the lineup with a lot of those pitchers, or even into the fourth time, to give some of those relief pitchers, a break or a blow, whatever you want to call it. And we've got some staffs that have 5, 6 guys with 50 plus appearances already. Yeah, I mean, we're getting into August, and you don't see many staffs that have 5 guys with 70 appearances. Mm-hmm. And I think we're on that road presently because of this, only going twice through the lineup, or maybe a little bit into the third time. Mm-hmm. I think this is a byproduct. And you brought up a very good point. Some of these guys can learn from that experience going through the third time. Maybe they can do this a little different, or that a little bit different. And then it becomes, hopefully they gain more confidence out of getting in that third time through the lineup.
Right.
So I think you need to do that and sacrifice a few wins and losses for those pitchers that you're trying to get through that third time. I mean, it's the minor leagues. Right. Yes, you want to win, but at the same time, it's a teaching tool to get these guys to the big leagues.
Yeah, and look, they're not worried about winning or losing. It's more just they're so concerned about someone getting hurt and living up to the analytics. Hey, you know what? If he only throws 5 innings or 4 innings, then, there's a less chance. But see, the problem is, to me, look, guys getting hurt is part of the process of getting the strongest to the big leagues. And if you look at what Atlanta's done, and to me, in the league that I'm in, they're the best in the league at developing starting pitching. They're constantly rolling in the next starting pitching. They're not pulling their guys out after 40, 50 pitches in 4 innings in August. I mean, they're letting those guys go and get up to 100 pitches and learn from that experience. And even if you get a couple of guys hurt along the way, as long as you're pushing 1 or 2 starters to the big leagues that are legitimate starters, you're going to be all right. And the problem is that that's not really what's happened here. And so we went years without any starters. Now, like I said, Justin Steele been good. Not only good, he's been great. And I love Javier Assad, but Javier Assad was like an exception to the rule. They actually let him pitch a lot. And I watched with my 2 eyes him go from being someone that, looked young and scared into a man, and he's in the big leagues right now. So proud of what he's been able to accomplish. So, just not to harp on it too much, but I think that you just got to, it's life, like you walk outside your house and you might not make it back home. I mean, that's just the way it is. But the strong survive, Tim. And when you get back to that mentality like Atlanta has, I think that you'll eventually be able to push up the guys that matter and get them to the big leagues and help you. Having a whole stable of relievers doesn't work, like you said, because if you throw 70 appearances in a season, you're not going to pitch very long.
And no, the life expectancy is definitely not that long. I mean, you have guys that have done it consistently, somewhere between, if they've pitched 10 years, maybe they've done it 5 or 6 times, but somewhere you're going to start looking for some more oil. And,
right. You better be ready.
It's just, not every one of those guys are durable enough and have that eternal arm like, the exceptions.
Right.
So.
Well, let's talk about the Cubs and the NL Central at the trade deadline a little more, but let's focus on a different aspect of it. Before we get there, though, thank you guys for being here with us on the MLB Scout podcast with Tim Wilkin. I'm Mick Gillispie. The channel is called Cubs Baseball Channel. Make sure that you subscribe. Look, we're rolling, man. We're closing in on 700 subscribers. When we get to 1,000, we're giving away a Ryan Sandberg autographed bobblehead doll. So send that out. If you have any questions, love the questions, love the comments. Ask Tim. He spent a lifetime as a scout and a scouting director with some of the best organizations in baseball. Helped the Blue Jays win back-to-back World Series. Went to Tampa Bay. Was with the Cubs, with Arizona recently. So he's got a lot of experience in this business. I've been around for a long time, just watching the action and calling the games, and we love to get together with you guys, and it's unbelievable that this is actually show number 9. So we're going to keep pumping them out. All right, Cubs and NL Central at the deadline. You knew the Pirates were going to sell. They did. They got off to a great start, teetered out. The Cardinals told us they were going to sell. They were really a surprise in the division. I thought they'd win, and they ended up awful. And the Reds, the Brewers, and the Cubs were all buyers. The surprise to me, and let's start with the Cubs, Tim, is that the Cubs have now a 1% chance of winning the World Series. And when the Tuesday before the trade deadline, so a week before the trade deadline, they had a 13.6% chance of making the playoffs. Then they won 8 in a row, and they decided to buy. What were your thoughts on the Cubs, the Brewers, and the Reds?
Well, I thought Milwaukee would be. I thought they might have one of the better chances around because of their closer Williams. They got a fairly competitive lineup with pretty decent hitters in it. Cincinnati, I think, possibly got there a little bit before some people thought. They've done a very good job, and it's a byproduct of what you're seeing on the field for the Reds, but they've done a pretty good job in the draft the last 7 to 10 years.
Yes.
And you see a lot of that coming to fruition on the field, especially with McLean and Dela Cruz and many others over
Hunter
there.
Green,
Fraley
Nick
and
Lodolo, yeah,
Friedel,
yeah,
Friedel, sorry.
Friedel, yeah.
And so you get that's a pretty darn good lineup. Uh, Hopefully their pitching holds up. I think that's a little bit of the Achilles heel there, but
Well, they've given up 36 runs in the last 2 games, so
good control. They're hitting all the bats.
yeah. But the problem that they have is that they need Nick Lodolo and Hunter Green. Hunter Green to me he's like Nolan Ryan. That was my comp. I know a lot of times, you look at a pitcher and you say, hey, this guy's kind of like Nolan Ryan. No, that guy seems like Nolan Ryan. I mean, everything that high, four-seam velocity fastball that has that upper plane and it never deviates and it's heavy. And that's what I saw when I saw Nolan Ryan as a kid going to games, like just watching him throw that past everybody. And look, the guy's still throwing 100 in the 7th inning.
Yeah, kind of like Garrett Cole with a little bit more velocity.
Yeah,
and similar frames where they're strong, durable guys, and hopefully, some of the learning curve that he has, hopefully he can put together his game even better going down the road. So, I mean,
fun
definitely
player.
Overpowering stuff. And getting to the Cubs, I was kind of concerned early in the year, and they've put that lineup together pretty good, especially the last 2 days here. But they can really swing the bats. It looks like defensively they're very solid. So on the hitting side of it, it's pretty darn good. The pitching side, they've had some decent fortune here lately, and I think it bodes pretty well. I didn't think I was going to see that out of them this year, but I thought that they would be the next one in line, thinking the Cardinals were going to be in there, and then all of a sudden we get the monstrous drop by the Cardinals. But I'm a little bit surprised about them. I'm a little surprised about Cincinnati because it's come earlier than advertised, and
Right.
And then you also talked about the Pirates earlier, and I think losing O'Neal Cruz has kind of hurt that club quite a bit. And I'm not sure on his timetable, but it's probably get back to the drawing board and try to create more depth with their club there. But
Well, let's go kind of focus back on the Cubs and just talk about the seller's market that was out there, right? And this was a year where there were a lot of teams that wanted to buy, and that started with the Angels and that Lucas Giolito deal where they traded away Kai Bush, who I think is going to have a really good career. I mean, he's a front-end starter and is just about ready for the big leagues, right? Maybe a year off. And then Edward Caro, who's a 20-year-old switch-hitting catcher who's like playing in Double-A every day, right? So you gave up your second and third-ranked prospects, 2 guys that can really play, to get Giolito and a reliever from the Sox. But that told me that it was going to be a seller's market, and it really was throughout. The teams that were buying, I think, got very good value. The Cubs went in with, at the time, less than a 1% chance of winning the World Series. But you and I were kind of talking before the show about the success rate of the players that are traded, the prospects. And even though I'm saying let's sell and let's go out there and basically take away an entire organization for Cody Bellinger and Marcus Stroman and whoever else you could get, you're not so sure all the time about that.
Well, if you spin forward to 2033, maybe 2023 reads out pretty good. But the MLB channel had a survey they had done on deadline trades since 2013, so it was a 10-year period. And uh, they said that the frontline players that were dealt, that were prospects at the time, uh, it was around 7 to 10% of those guys became that. Guys that were contributors to a club during that time period after the trade, that was somewhere around 12 to 15%. And as we discussed earlier before the show, that 29% of those players that were in those deals for those 10 years, 29% of those players have never played a day in the big leagues.
Wow.
So
that's crazy. It's hard to get to the big leagues. I saw a release the other day that somebody put on Twitter that said if you took the smallest Major League Baseball stadium, right, under 40,000, and you put every single guy that ever played in the major leagues, you'd still have room to sell more tickets. And that's the history of the game. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I saw that. I think Jeff Fry was the one that posted it, and I think we're over 23,000 players that have played Major League Baseball through the years.
Think about that. That's like not even that's a small crowd in terms of Major League games, right? Like we're a mediocre crowd, depending on what market. But that's how hard it is. That's how crazy hard it is to get to the major leagues.
That's 13,000 less people than the city I live in here in Dunedin, Florida.
Beautiful Dunedin.
Yeah, the new nation
with the Gopher
capital.
Turtles. Yeah.
Yeah, Gopher Turtles. Yeah, they're extinct.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
No, they're not. They're in your front yard.
Oh, yeah.
He's Tim Wilkin. I'm Mick Gillispie. Guys, please follow at Cubs Baseball Channel. Not only do we have Scout Podcast, Tim and I are going to do Cubs prospect breakdowns. We'll let you know what we think about. We'll give you the breakdown of some of the up-and-comers that the Cubs have in their system. Charlie Walter and I cover the Cubs every single day, and you guys have made this channel hot because you're subscribing. We need to get to 1,000 so I can give you, maybe you're the lucky one to get a Ryan Sandberg autographed baseball. Rhino gave me a dozen of those, Tim, back in the day. Like I traded him in a Blockbuster deal, a bunch of Smokies polos for a dozen balls, and I definitely got the better end of that trade.
It was a frenzy, just like these trade deadlines.
I know. Let's talk a little bit about your memory of the best and worst deadline deals and anything that pops into your mind, about trades. I got to throw one out there, and I think one of the best deals I ever saw was when Theo and I think you were with the Cubs front office at the time. You guys traded Scott Feldman and Steve Clevenger to Baltimore, and you got back Jake Arrieta and Pedro Strop. And look, at the time, no one knew that was going to be like a trade that we'll be talking about forever. But the way I understand it is that you guys were very strategic about the games that Scott Feldman started. You wanted to try to find, or they wanted to try to find matchups that benefited him, keep the numbers looking good. And then that trade happened, and obviously the rest is history.
Oh, boy. I mean, that was quite the trade for the Cubs. And I remember when Arrieta came over, and he proved out to be, one of the leaders on that staff. And naturally, we know the stuff. And Pedro Strop gave some many good appearances during that time period.
Yeah, won the World Series with those guys. Who else? Tell me some other trades, best and worst.
Oh,
could be a deal that somebody made and gave up something, or somebody, maybe both teams. Gary Hughes used to say this all the time, and I got to bring up Gary as much as I can because you and I both love him and we miss him. And He meant a lot to our lives, and not only that, he was one of the greatest scouts of all times. But he's also one of the greatest people of all times. And he sat in here and he told me one time and said it over and over again that when you make a trade, you want a trade that feels good for both sides, that both sides win, right? So it could be a trade that both sides won. Just, but think about those deals that have happened over the years. And, to me, obviously the Arrieta trade worked out a lot better for the Cubs than it did for the Baltimore Orioles.
Sure. And I mean, you still got to deal with these clubs down the road.
Right.
And, if you get a lot of clips coming out, hey, they got the best of the deal. Well, the club you just made the deal with might be a little tentative about dealing with you again. So
Right. Right. Right.
you naturally want those players that you have had to do well for other clubs. It doesn't always happen that way, and I don't know if I can give you a good example of it here in the last 10 years, but uh, uh, I think way back in the day, and I don't think it was a deadline trade. I don't know if they had it at that time, but was a pitcher named Ernie Broglio that was with the Cardinals, and there was a guy that was with the Cubs that just got to the big leagues named Lou Brock.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, I think the Cardinals and the Cubs quit trading because the trade was pretty lopsided,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
and I think it kind of it spawned off a couple things. First of all, don't trade within your division,
Right.
and we see that once in a while. Clubs just will not deal with the other club that's in their division because they don't want to take the brunt of the scribes. But it's one of those things. You really, I mean, you've tried to develop those players that you've traded, and you hope for the best for them, but you're trying to get better too. So
Hmm.
uh, I think clubs would almost every one of those clubs would tell you, yeah, we would like for our players that we just traded to do well, but it's a two-sided coin there because you just want to be able to possibly deal with those teams in the future.
Yeah. Well, that also goes true. That also holds true for in the same city. I mean, you don't see the Cubs and the White Sox make a ton of trades, although they have recently. And it's because those trades are so scrutinized, right? Jose Quintana traded to the Cubs for a couple of prospects, and you look at those guys that were traded over by the Cubs, and they end up being two of the best players that the Sox have. And Quintana was good, but he wasn't great. But we just talk about it all the time.
Oh, no doubt, and I'm sure the Cubs probably got hit with a lot of it, especially trading Dylan Cease and forgetting the other guy, but Eloy Jimenez.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I mean, they traded those guys, and I'm just wondering if there's a little defense mechanism there now as they're possibly trying to make deals. So
Yeah, right. Well, it makes it tough. I mean, when you see Jimenez and he's he hasn't really put it together totally yet because he's had some weird injuries, including an emergency appendectomy, which I had too. Like we had it right around the same time. So he's become one of the guys that I like. He actually rehabbed here. And then Dylan Cease is like the ace of the staff, and Quintana was solid. I mean, it wasn't a lose-lose trade.
no,
At the time, it was a trade that, the Cubs felt like they had to make to contend. But looking back, it was the beginning of basically gutting the Cubs minor league system. And that ends up that ends up coming back to haunt you later on down the road when you're not developing from when you're in your own system, And I got to give the Dodgers a lot of credit because they make trades, but they don't gut their minor league system. Like they're still one of the top teams in the league every year, and it's developing guys within their system, but making trades and trading the right pieces that aren't going to come back and haunt them. The Cubs were in the midst of not developing any starting pitching, and then you trade Dylan Cease, and he's in the big league starting. And you're like, hey, we could have used that.
we had one of our podcasts earlier, and we had talked about the Dodgers. And in that conversation, I said that the Dodgers 4 or 5 years ago have 14 of their drafts that have had major league time. And, you can even make a deal where you're trading, at least contributors, maybe not so much front line all the time, but you can lose a couple of those guys in a deal. And in the Dodgers case, they still have more to pull up through the system.
Right.
And what's kind of amazing about that is they've always been picking toward the end of the draft.
Right.
So, they've done a good job there.
Well, let's transition right into this. Former Dodger, now with the Cubs, came up through their system. Cody Bellinger, NL Player of the Month. He's been amazing. I think the Cubs would have gotten a haul for him, but it's fun contending. Look, I mean, the Cub fan in me says, "Hey, let's go for it!" Right? The GM in me says, you know what? I would have loved to have seen what I could have gotten for this guy, but you know what? It's great to have him back. And not trade it just because we're going to have a lot of great baseball to watch. He signed with the Cubs, Tim, a 1-year contract after, kind of being, cast away by the Dodgers. And all of a sudden, he's one of baseball's best players again.
I see a little bit difference in his swing in the last couple of years. I think he's into his lower half a little better. The rhythm seems to be more consistent. And I don't know who he gives credit to, but beside himself to implement it, the swing just looks so much different, almost like his earlier years. And like I said, the rhythm and the swing path and everything has seemed to change. And he just you can see the confidence coming out in him now. I mean, he lost it there for almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun to watch him play. We'll see if the patience the Cubs have had not dealing him, if that pays off. But I think there's a pretty good chance for Cody to be contributing to that club in a high level.
Yeah. Well, they kind of talked about an extension at the beginning of the year. There was some talk there. It didn't happen. And now with Scott Boras, he's probably saying, hey, let's just hold out because we're going to get that big payday that we always thought we were going to get. But you're right. You go back to his swing, and I just feel like when I used to watch the Dodgers, he had such a tough time with, the elevated pitches, and now he looks so much better hitting those. Like, it's like he's a little I don't really know why. I mean, I'm not a hit mechanic or anything, but, just watching him, you're not getting those by him anymore.
No. It looks to me like in his swing path, he's coming across the ball more than he is coming up through the ball.
Yeah, you're right. He's more, instead of being like, hey, I got to hit under it, he's just hitting it.
I don't know if that's...
like old school, they used to tell you to drive through the ball.
Yeah, and his not only his swing path, but his rhythm, you can tell he's into his legs more. And I don't know if that's something that he did himself or hitting instructor suggested, and he ran with it. So it's certainly been fun to watch this year.
He's great.
To see the old Cody Bellinger.
He hit 400 for the month.
40
for 101, right? Amazing.
Wow.
All right, let's get to before we get to Tim's scouting tip of the show, let me remind you guys that we want you to be part of the Cubs Baseball Channel at Cubs Baseball Channel. This is the MLB Baseball Scout podcast. Tim, I ran into one of your old scout buddies. Not going to say who it is on the show. We'll just keep that between us. I said, I don't know if you could do this show because we're going to tell you like it is, and we're not going to pretend that we think that the be-all, end-all is analytics. I mean, we like analytics, but we don't think that analytics runs the world. And he said, I couldn't come on the show because I really agree. And I thought, well, that's probably why I like you. Maybe it's just we're just pandering to our own audience. But guys, share the show and tell us about it. We're just a couple guys that love the game.
Yes, it's always been fun to go to the ballpark, and I love breaking this down because it's not the end all, as you mentioned earlier. If you could have this balance, that would be great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, There's other clubs that think they've had a fair amount of success due to it. So, uh, there might be some things to it that I've always had an open mind, but at the same time, I've still got my theories and thought process going into uh, breaking down each and every player.
Right. Just because you watched the movie Moneyball and read the book doesn't mean that all of that stuff really works. Some of it does. All right, Tim, let's go to your Tim scouting tip of the show. I love these. You spent all those years scouting, and that means being at a lot of games and trying to figure out of these star amateur players and sometimes pro players, what makes them tick. Give me your scouting tip of the day.
Okay, the scouting tip of the day is especially geared for some of the younger guys that have just started scouting. And it's at times when you go to amateur ball games, especially high school, you don't necessarily, you can see a runner run and you can see the running stride, the running gait that you could say, okay, this guy's got a chance to be a plus runner. But a lot of these games that you go to, uh, you might not have good running times, and that can be because of coming off of a ball or getting jammed or just not being able to get out of the box that well. So those running times, 4.3 is average for a right-handed hitter, 4.2 for a left-hander, and sometimes you're not getting those times. So stick with your thought process on the running gait, their stride, their ability to accelerate once underway. And one of the things that I used to use, and most of the time on a high school level, not so much on the college side, you would see runners where you would never get a running time. So we started trying to get our scouts to get into this a little bit more. Most of the times, most of these players that we're going to see have some kind of speed. So once they get on first base, and we had steal times, and our charts were, I wish I could show you a chart, but I don't have it here with me, but the upper or the lower end of guys that would be below average would be 3.5 seconds, 3.6, 3.7. So we had a scale for those guys, and they generally were anywhere from 30 to 40 runners, and probably a lot of them catchers and blah, blah, blah. Average steal time to second base would be 3.4 seconds. So that's a 50 runner on this scale. Then if he's a plus runner, it's 3.3. If he's a plus runner, a 70 runner in scouts terms, he's a 3.2 guy. And then your 70 to 80 runners were like 3.1. So we had talked about the story earlier between Mick and I that when Billy Hamilton first got to the big leagues, he had been, prior to that, he was in Bakersfield, California with the Reds A club in the Cal League. And I guess he steals second one night, and there were 4 scouts there, and they had times anywhere from 2.8 to 3.2, 2.8 to 3.1. Sorry, and so that would be a 30 to 20 runner, and we just called it a Hamilton instead of plus runner.
He got his own category. He's the fastest guy I've ever seen.
Oh, without a doubt.
Uniform.
Very exciting to scout as an amateur, and it was a fun time. Shame on me. He probably should have been a Cub if I had any backbone at that given time.
You should have gone after him. Look, I still think that he underachieved in the major leagues. I really do. I mean, and I think he's still on a roster maybe. I mean, look, his speed would keep him there, but It was
I'm
unbelievable
sure.
watching him.
I'm sure we get into September, if he's still of good health, that there might be a club that takes him just for that stolen base,
Yeah, no doubt.
and
Well,
that
he could help you.
could be awful interesting.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I hear the lawnmower in the background at your house. That
Sorry
means
about that.
that's the sign that it's about time for us to wrap things up. But this is, look, we've done a lot of shows. This was my favorite one. I had a great time today. Thank you. Anything that you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, maybe on one of our next ones we'll talk about the demographics on a high school catcher.
Let's do it. But
Yes.
today, we're done. For Tim Wilkin, I'm Mick Gillispie. Again, guys, do us a solid at Cubs Baseball channel. Be part of it. Send us your questions and comments. We'll get to them. We're going to talk a lot as we roll on. The MLB Baseball Scout Podcast with Tim Wilkin. I'm Mick Gillispie. Thanks for hanging out with us. We will talk to you again soon.
People, sorry about the mower.